Hi, my name is Keith Cooper, and in this short video I'm going to look at an aspect of printing black and white photos. In particular, I'm going to show a use for the black and white test image that I've produced. Now, this test image has been around for a few years. You can see by the sheer number of prints I've got here, I use it a lot when I'm testing printers. It's been specifically created for testing aspects of black and white print quality, and I've got another video linked in the description for the video here that goes into more details about using it. But this is using one of these targets, and in this instance a scanner, to help linearize your prints. What do I mean by linearize your prints? I mean so that the tones are evenly balanced over the range, so that the blacks aren't crunched up, so that your shadows that look okay on your screen, which of course ideally needs to be calibrated and profiled even for black and white, so that the blacks aren't crunched up, or the shadows aren't too open, although that's less common a problem, or the picture itself is too dark, too bright. Some people use, particularly for colour images, use soft proofing as an aid, which can be useful. But one of the things I always say about printing black and white is that most printers, actually the better printers, have a dedicated black and white, that's black and white mode in Canon printers, or the ABW advanced black and white mode for Epson printers, and that generally produces superior results. Now, one of the things is it produces superior results on Epson or Canon papers as appropriate. It usually produces good results on third-party papers as well, if you match the paper type you've got to the associated media type. So whether it be a fine art or a luster or a glossy paper, you'll find there's a match. But once you start using third-party papers, there may be a slight drift between them, a slight difference. Now, normally you'd use ICC profiles, but the majority of the time, if there's a dedicated black and white mode, it is better than printing with an ICC profile. Now, ICC profiles work great, got lots of examples of using them. In fact, I've got lots of examples of making black and white prints using various printers that I've reviewed. But this is just a generic look at how to fix aspects of printing. Now, I'm going to go through this at a fairly high level. If you'd like more detail on the process, look at the linked article, because I can't go through too much specific detail here in a video, because then it becomes irrelevant to some people's printers or some people's editing setups. So I'm just going to show the principles, and I'm going to use, as I say, the black and white test image. Now, the test image that is down here, this is one that I've produced for automated scanning. So I just run this into a scanning spectrophotometer. It reads the strip at the top, produces the numbers I want to actually check on black and white performance. However, there are lots of other versions of this test image that I've produced for different purposes. Once again, check the links with the video and that will show you what's what. The written articles always have far more detail than the videos. Part of that is because I can go back and refine and fine-tune and update the articles, whereas the videos are just stuck as recorded. And so the articles are where you should go for detail. So here's the basic image, which I've described elsewhere. And here are two versions of it. Now you can see that two versions actually differ in the target, and that's because of different ways of measuring these targets. This is the version for an automated scanning spectrophotometer. This is one for a hand scanned one, and this is one using spider print. Now, all of these methods use spectrophotometers, or spectrocalorimeter in this case, for doing the scan, and I appreciate that not many people tend to have such things. If you do, you're probably making your own profiles. Anyway, these are made, if you have one of those devices, check the articles, they'll tell you how to do this easier than I'm going to do here. This is a very rough and ready process using an ordinary scanner. But you'll notice that the patches here, there's a set of patches. There's 51 on this, which we don't need that much degree of accuracy. The 21 step patches is more than enough. That 21 steps, that's 5% intervals in darkness from 0% to 100% black. So that's across the range. So it goes from white or paper white to full black in 5% steps. Now, you take one of these, print it, and obviously you don't need to print it this big, and you print that, and you then measure it. Now, if you haven't got a spectrophotometer, you can measure it in a scanner. Here's the print setup that I've used for this one. In this particular example, I was printing to the Epson P5000. I've set it normal printing. I'm using a larger sheet of paper. You don't need to print the whole image. If you just want to do several tests, you can just print, you can crop out part of the image and just print the target and just measure that. But anyway, that's the print setup that I would use. And I'm just using the normal printing as I was in this instance from Photoshop, but I could print with an Epson printer via Epson print layout, or I could use the Canon print software. It's however you normally print your black and white images. After that, I've now got a print, I need to scan it. Now I'm not going to show the scanning process here. I used a flatbed scanner, an old Epson 1200 that I've had for years, USB scanner, works reliably. No problems with it. I've used it for many years. I don't do much scanning, but I'm using ViewScan software. If you do much scanning, and I've looked at this when I reviewed the Epson 8550, which had a built-in scanner for reproducing artwork, the ViewScan software is excellent. I bought this years ago. It's relatively cheap. It supports thousands and thousands of scanners. So if you've got an old scanner that isn't supported anymore, ViewScan can probably bring it back to life. Highly unlikely you'll find a scanner that isn't supported. Mac or Windows isn't supported, and with that, I've even used this with scanners from the 90s, and they work perfectly well. It was written by the guy who just didn't want to see scanners going onto the scrap heap. Perfectly usable scanners, great. Ed Hamrick's his name. Buy the software. I can only recommend it. So, you know, I use it for film scanning as well, by the way. On rare occasions I do that. But anyway, there's our scanned image. Now, here's part of the image, actually scanned from a print. Now, you can see here, it's got these black and white lines running through it. They're actually for a spectrophotometer, for probably for an i1 Pro, where you scan it manually and it uses these lines here to detect the difference between the patches. That's fine, that's a scan of the image. Now, when you scan your image, it's worth having a look at bits of it, because the single most instantly telling part of this test image is actually this bullseye target, which has to look nice and smooth. There it is enlarged. We can see marks on the paper, we can see texture on the paper, we can see all kinds of things. One of the things you're going to have to do with scanned images like this when you want to make measurements is probably apply a bit of smoothing to it, but I'll cover that in a moment. But that's the bullseye enlarged, and that's enlarged from a scan of a piece of paper that size. Now, I've opened this. I'm using Photoshop for this. You could use Affinity Photo, which is an excellent bit of software, but you do need some editing software for this approach, which offers you basic curves and level adjustments. If you use Lightroom, then you're going to have difficulties with this because it doesn't offer any of this sort of stuff. This really is Photoshop-y type stuff. Let's say Affinity Photo, much cheaper, excellent bit of software that does this as well. But in this instance, I'm looking at the scanned image here, and I'm looking at the histogram. Now I can see first of all the histogram shoved over to one side. That's because the scan doesn't necessarily record full blacks as the blackest ink as full black here. So you can see there's a gap in the histogram. Now, it's also quite smooth. There's not much detail in that histogram. It's a bit of a problem. I can adjust the range quite easily, use it with a levels adjustment. Just bring up the black point to the bottom, bring the white point to some of the top, and so I've got a nice range of these little peaks. These little peaks, by the way, correspond to the different colours, different intensities in the target from the measurement. As I say, that's a 21-step one. 51-step, don't bother with it. It's more trouble than it's worth for this approach. Because remember, you're relying on the accuracy of your scanner here. Now, your scanner may not be as accurate as you think it is. Even if you've calibrated and profiled it, there still can be slight issues with it. So this is a very rough and ready approach, but it does work. So I take that. What I actually need to do is in Photoshop, I clean up the image. That means I delete away the fuzz. So I just end up with the middle of each bit of target. And I use that, and because I've got now a much cleaner scan, and you can see the white lines between this where I've cropped out the soft borders between things, and instantly the histogram is so much sharper. You can see those spikes. They tell you the different patches. You don't need necessarily, it can be interesting to have a look at it, and I say look at the article if you're interested in it, to look at the actual numbers. But you can see here there's a big clump of spikes down the black end, and that tells me that shadows are getting crunched up. Now, when you print using this image, there are various aspects of it, in particular aspects of this image here, which allow you to check for shadow crunching. But I can see from this scan here that the spikes are crunched up together at the black end. That means I need to open out the shadows with a curve. Now, correction curves are quite easy to do. You'll find that when you open up a curve adjustment, you get a line across it. That's usually from black to white. If you push the curve up, it boosts the center tones. If you pull it down, it makes them darker. Because we're seeing that the blacks are crunched up in this particular example here, I need to stretch the blacks a bit. That means I need to make a small curve adjustment. Now, one thing just to remember, if you're working in black and white mode in Photoshop, or if you're working in colour in Photoshop, the curves are reversed as to which is the bright end, which is the dark end. Just make care of that. If you've used curves at all, you'll be familiar with it, but it's just a little warning. I forget sometimes. I think this curve looks wrong, and I think, that's because I'm editing a black and white image in a black and white mode. Here's the curve I've created. Now this goes from, this one, as I was saying, this goes from white at this end to black at this end. And all I've done is I've just pulled the curve with a few points here just to make a slight adjustment. The thing is, if you find you need to make very strong adjustments here, you're likely going to be disappointed, because that suggests that the actual print setup has something wrong about it. You may need to change your settings. You may want to go into the black and white mode settings and change something about that. Particularly some third-party papers, I've found this happens. But basically, if you find yourself having to make too much of an adjustment here, take that as a hint to go back and redo your test image with slightly different settings and see what happens as it comes out. In this one here, all I need to do is open up the shadows a bit, and I'll do that, as I say, with that simple curve. Now, once I apply this curve, I now can see the histogram, and I can now see those spikes nice and evenly spaced. There's a bit of mush at one end, and that's purely because we're working in an 8-bit, we're applying curves, we're stretching things, and you do sometimes get a bit of posterization in it. Doesn't matter, but that's part of the reasons why I say you shouldn't need to apply much of an adjustment here. So what have I done? I've printed an image. I've measured each of these patches, and I'm looking at how they deviate from a linear approach. So they should go, the 100% black should be blacker than the 95% black, which should be blacker than the 90% black. Looking at the shape of the histogram here, I've seen there's a bit of crunching of shadows, so I apply a curve that opens out the shadows a little bit. Very rough and ready. This is nowhere near the sort of precision that I would get applying, creating a curve using something like this. And as I say, I've got lots of articles that go into details of all this, but this is a quick fix if you're finding that your prints, the shadows crunch up too much or the midtones are too light. This is an adjustment curve you can apply before printing. Now, if you're using the Canon print software in its black and white mode, it is actually possible to apply a curve, to save a curve and apply a curve. So you can create a curve for your paper in Photoshop, this is with Canon, and then when you're looking at the printer settings for the black and white mode, using the Canon software, you can actually just apply a curve. But that's quite specific just to the Canon stuff there. So what's the net effect of it? Well, it's going to be very difficult to show on this video, but this is just switching between the adjusted and the non-adjusted. Very small curve here. I'll just cut this in so you can see it hopefully, and it shows the effect of a curve. The lighter image is actually too light, because what we're doing, we're sending not a correct image, because we've got the correct image to start with. We're having to make it a bit too light in the shadows so that the printer, crunching the shadows, cancels out that adjustment we've applied and gives us a more linear approach. So this is a very experimental thing. This is the sort of thing that if you just want to, if you've got a scanner, you're interested in black and white printing and want something to play around with and see how well your printer is working, you can do it with this. You don't need a spectrophotometer and all the fancy kit. So I hope that helps. By all means, I say, do check out the linked articles, because that's got much more detail in it, including how to use all this testing. And I've got hundreds of articles that go back many years looking at black and white printing, as well as quite a few videos, but the videos are relatively recent. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please do subscribe to the channel if you find it useful. Feel free to ask questions, because it was a question somebody asked me about this that made me realise I'd written articles about this but had never covered it on a video. So thanks very much.